Zer0 Books readers, it's me again, Douglas Lain. I'm out and about. Just thought I'd go for a walk and get some shots. And what this video is going to be about is, Matt Taibbi and Nathan Robinson and the question of the left and its sanity. Now, what I'll probably do is read a lot of this aloud into my microphone back in my house, but for now, I thought I'd get out a little bit and get some shots to fill in, do some B-roll, and talk to you about the battle around the censoriousness of the left, the extremity of the left, the identity politics of the left, the new anarchism that's dominating the left, and I just wanted to say the word left as many times as possible in this video, so I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, I'm Ben with the Zer0 Books YouTube channel. Do you mind giving me your name? Or
I'm John.
John. Hi, John. Are you on the medic team here?
Yes.
So what do you guys do when you're in general?
When things were exploding, we were treating the sick and injured from that, and then now we're kind of doing quasi-festival medicine. We still are seeing some stuff like overdoses and whatnot, but none of the burns and death and stuff from earlier.
All right, so I've got this essay here. I'm going to read it to you. But before I do, I want to point out that this video will also feature some footage and interviews from CHOP, or Chaz, which is the 6-city block area in Seattle that is being occupied by protesters against the murder of George Floyd, protesters against the police, and I think ultimately protesters against the U.S. state. So my son Ben went to Seattle. He conducted those interviews, and you'll get to see a few of those along the way. But to begin with, in the last 2 weeks, a conversation has taken place about the sanity of the left on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and in something called Substack. Two major voices have emerged from the clamor of conversation. The first would be Matt Taibbi, who gave expression to what might be called the normie position. Matt wrote an essay entitled "The American Press is Destroying Itself." In it, he wrote about what he sees as a trend of woke censorship in the American media. And he said that today, press activism is limited to denouncing and shaming colleagues for insufficient fealty to the cheap knockoff of bullying campus Marxism that passes for leftist thought these days. In response, the anarchist anti-Marxist Nathan Robinson wrote an essay entitled "Has the American Left Lost Its Mind?" In it, he paraphrased Taibbi's thesis this way. He said, there's a whole new movement, an intellectual revolution, which is conning organizations, threatening people, destroying our belief in free inquiry, and persecuting thought crime. This movement is apparently called the American left. Of course, Taibbi does not think he is describing a self-conscious and organized movement, but rather a cultural trend that is being reinforced by the media, one that has been going on for maybe a decade now or longer. Further, symptoms of this tendency have appeared in left publications and left political movements like the DSA. And it's been appearing there just as often as they've been appearing in mainstream publications. The DSA's recent move to cancel a scheduled lecture from Adolph Reed on the basis of Reed's racist class reductionism is evidence enough that an illiberal censoriousness is operative on the left. But the squibbling about the difference between liberals and leftists is really a ruse, because Robinson would justify the examples of insanity that Taibbi brought up in his essay. For example, Robinson explains that Taibbi misrepresented the story about a professor at UCLA who was put under investigation for reading MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail aloud in class. That professor wasn't investigated because he'd read Martin Luther King's words, but because he'd read all of them. That is, he'd included the N-word, which Martin Luther King had also included. Now, this additional detail doesn't change my assessment of the investigation of this UCLA professor. I think it is a symptom of our major dysfunction that people objected to the reading of a letter from the Birmingham jail, with or without the N-word. I think it's a symptom of our dysfunction, and I think that Nathan Robinson's essay is also an example of that same dysfunction. He typifies what's wrong with the left, at least in this essay, not only because he sides with the censorious, authoritarian, and ultimately irrational liberal wing of the Democratic Party, but also because of his cheerleading at a moment when what's needed is critical support, if not just outright criticism. Nathan Robinson wrote, "The American left is actually better off now than at almost any other time in my life. We are running great candidates for office, many of whom are winning, and we have radical new possibilities for rethinking criminal punishment. Those are emerging, and the current protest movement is winning public support." Now, the first assertion flies in the face of the facts, as Bernie Sanders' loss of the nomination was a resounding defeat. The second denies the primary problem that the left faces, namely our inability to be radical and create new possibilities. And while the current protest movement may be winning public support for some slogans right now, to think of this as a victory over in the overall sense is a misunderstanding of the character of this moment.
I'm Ben, recording here and trying to do interviews for Zer0 Books. Do you mind giving me your name or something I could call you?
My name is Travis James Lee Johnson, but everybody calls me Grim. I say that we should be here longer, and I also say that there should be more protests like this around the country. I think Donald Trump can go suck my dick. At first, I was all for him, but then I really read his politics, and I was like, what the fuck?
You were originally in favor of him?
Originally, yes.
Oh, really?
But then I changed.
Yeah.
You know? Actually, even though I'm Republican, most people think I'm a Democrat because of my political views.
So how long have you been involved in the autonomous zone?
A while. I've seen a lot here. I've seen the mayor here. She shows herself only behind her armed escort, of course.
Of course. But now they're setting up all these, you can't see them in the video, but they're setting up all these, the city's setting up their own barricades, right? As opposed to the ones that were set up by the protesters.
It's a war.
In a recent interview for the This Is Hell podcast, the political science and African American studies professor Cedric Johnson noted that the last month has seen two separate political movements arise. Most recently, we've seen the rise of the Neo-Black Lives Matter movement, which has involved peaceful protests and which has received a massive amount of support from nearly every sector of society. Everyone from Amazon's CEO Jeff Bezos to the preeminent anarchist philosopher Noam Chomsky has embraced the new Black Lives Matter. But Johnson notes, before the peaceful protests and BLM slogans took hold, there was also a massive amount of just unrest. There was an anti-Trump uprising that went far beyond the resistance that has defined and constrained anti-Trump sentiment for the last 3 years. The rioters and looters, the unruly mob that forced Trump to hide in the presidential bunker under the White House, was not partisan. The uprising was aimed at the state and its authority in general, and not just at Trump, not just at the Republican Party. As a spontaneous reaction, this uprising had little chance in succeeding, but could only be taken up as another symptom of the current order's fragility. But despite this limitation of a spontaneous uprising, Johnson seems to be warning us that we should be wary of accepting the terms of the already existing power structures that are recuperating this moment.
I'm Ben with the Zer0 Books YouTube channel. Can I ask what your name is?
My name is Justin.
Yeah, you're here with Seattle DSA, obviously. Have you been here at the, well, I don't know whether to call it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest anymore?
There's many names.
There's many names.
Chap, you know.
What do you think the DSA can do here? Like, what is the goal of the DSA here?
The goal of DSA is really not to, lead this movement. We are supporting, the demands of Black and Indigenous, led groups such as, the COVID-19 mutual aid group in Seattle. So we are trying to amplify what they're doing. We're collecting signatures for deepened SPD, reinvest in community, and free the protesters.
Right. Okay. I used to be involved in a YDSA group somewhere. I know we would go to things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the title of this video is Call Out Culture and the Limitations of Anarchism. And as you've probably noticed so far, what I've done is critique call out culture. And even more suspiciously, I've critiqued the peaceful protests calling for the state to rein in the cops. But to round this video out, I want to present one more problematic take. I want to give viewers one more reason to distrust me. Here it is. The American anarchist milieu, whether activist, lifestylist, or academic, is merely a faction within the Democratic Party. Say it again. The American anarchist milieu, whether activist, lifestylist, or academic, is merely a faction within the Democratic Party. This is to be expected because despite calling themselves socialists and conceiving of themselves as the most radical participants in the struggle for socialism, ever since the First International, the anarchists have been liberals. Now, this is not really a very controversial thing to say. And an anarchist like Noam Chomsky, the most famous American leftist, and perhaps the most famous leftist in the world, would agree. In fact, since the 70s, he's traced his own libertarian socialism back to Humboldt, Rousseau, and Descartes.
The modern conservative tends to regard himself as the lineal descendant of the classical liberal in this sense, but I think that can be maintained only from an extremely superficial point of view, as one can see by studying more carefully the fundamental ideas of classical libertarian thought, as expressed, in my opinion, in its most profound form by Humboldt. I think the issues are of really quite considerable contemporary significance, and if you don't mind what may appear to be a somewhat antiquarian excursion, I'd like to expand on them. For Humboldt, as for Rousseau, and before him the Cartesians, man's essential attribute is his freedom. Quote, to inquire and to create, these are the centers around which all human pursuits more or less directly revolve. But, he goes on to say, all moral culture springs solely and immediately from the inner life of the soul and can never be produced by external and artificial contrivances. The cultivation of the understanding, as of any of man's other faculties, is generally achieved by his own activity, his own ingenuity, or his own methods of using the discoveries of others.
Where I would disagree with Humboldt and Chomsky is on the source of mankind's creativity. And I would disagree with their definition of the task that faces us as we attempt to overcome the problems of today's society and become free. While it's true that what defines humanity, what defines the human being, is his or her freedom, his freedom to inquire and create, I would disagree that the individual human is the source of that freedom. Rather, it is the collective efforts of people in a group that have the potential to free the individual, as nobody is a rock or an island. At Marx's funeral, Engels noted that Marx's greatest contribution to the struggle for socialism was his discovery of the simple fact, hitherto concealed by an overgrowth of ideology, that mankind must first of all eat, drink, and have shelter before it can pursue politics, science, art, religion, and so on. That therefore, the production of the immediate material means, and consequently the degree of economic development attained by a given people or during a given epoch, form the foundation upon which the state institutions, the legal conceptions, art, and even the ideas on religion have been evolved, and in the light of which they must therefore be explained, instead of vice versa, as had hitherto been the case. Marx himself put it in a different way when he criticized Proudhon in the book The Poverty of Philosophy. He thought Proudhon was wrong to explain the market in terms of individual needs. Proudhon had said that the need for exchange had arrived quite naturally because a single individual, cannot lay his hands upon all the things he feels he needs, not on his own or through his own labor. Therefore, the need to exchange goods arose to meet the needs of individuals. But Marx disagreed, because the assumption that there was a multiplicity of goods that one might want or need already presupposed a certain mode of life, a mode of life that included the market, which was what Proudhon was trying to explain. Marx wrote, "The moment you postulate more than one hand helping in production, you at once presuppose a whole production based on the division of labor. Thus, need, as Proudhon presupposes it, itself presupposes the whole division of labor. And in presupposing the division of labor, you get exchange. One might as well have presupposed exchange from the very beginning." Similarly, just as Proudhon can't understand what an individual needs without understanding how collective work has already been arranged, activists today can't understand freedom only in terms of individual liberty. So, a person is not really free just because the cops aren't around. And true freedom will have to be productive. It will have to be collective. We'll have to aim at changing the fundamental way we act, the way we act together to produce the things we need and to produce our very material interests.
My name is Marcus Henderson. I'm a volunteer here at the community garden.
You've been here since the beginning of...
I've been coming to the protest since the beginning. I carried my bike down from where I live on Saturday, that first Saturday night after things started getting violent, and then I've just been coming back pretty much every day. I think it was maybe 1 or 2 days that I took off.
That's cool. So this, do you prefer to call it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone or the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest? Do you have a preference on that naming?
I don't have any naming. I haven't been a part of that process, so I don't feel any sort of ownership to any of them.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Do you know if it was set up like as the result of a big initial protest, right?
Yes.
And I know that they abandoned the police station.
Yeah.
Would you say it was like a pretty natural result of that original protest when it happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had spent so much time here over the last week or so. We had kind of built up an infrastructure here, a network of medics and food sources and supplies, and people were already kind of camping out a little bit here. So it kind of just we had that infrastructure, and it was easy for us to kind of settle into it. And also we just weren't sure what was going to happen next. It kind of seemed like this was maybe a trap or something. So we just wanted to kind of protect ourselves. So we slowly started doing that aspect of things. And then from there, then it kind of just, became a thing. It got named something, and I think that brought a lot of energy from the outside, which then kind of started to establish this as a place. So it was really, I think, a combination of the media portraying this as something, portraying this as the autonomous zone, and kind of creating that narrative that then kind of brought this to life even more so. I think that the most important thing is how do we survive if we're going to be here? I don't think we're trying to build actual 3-story buildings and start putting a lot of permanent infrastructure, but at least while we're here we want to be able to support ourselves. So we're establishing kitchens and maybe a way to have food in a couple months. But I think the long-term goals, or the long-term or the short-term goal, is to just be prepared for whatever happens. If the cops come back, we want to protect ourselves. So yeah, I think it's more just a day-by-day process and watching it develop and grow.
Taking it mostly day by day.
What's interesting is that, though, a lot of the community, again, sees the potential in this becoming something permanent. So then, in that sense, there's a lot of, again, outside pressure to actually make the things that we're doing permanent. My initial kind of action of starting this garden here wasn't to create something that was going to necessarily last forever. I was trying to do some guerrilla gardening and maybe show how we use public space as a demonstration, as an art piece. And now we're kind of building infrastructure to actually support it, which is really cool that people want something permanent here. It shows that the community wants something different, wants to see change.
I'll say that the gardens look really good.
Yeah, thank you.
They look very good.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this Zer0 Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zer0 Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zer0 Books book club and help us to continue making online content from the left.